modify some fiscal constraint assumptions. I'll mention that in my presentation.
All right.
Oh, no.
All right, guys are set up and are live streaming now.
Great. Thanks, Logan.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah. I'm gonna test to see if my slideshow is behaving properly. Can you see the full slideshow, or do you see my notes?
I see the presentation slide.
The full slide? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We'll give everybody another minute or so to get on and we'll get started. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's the second in our series of financial constrainment meetings for the Long Range Transportation Subcommittee. We have the COVID-19 statement.
All right, good morning, everyone. Pursuant to the declared state of emergency in the Commonwealth of Virginia in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to protect the public health and safety of the Long Range Transportation Plan Subcommittee members, staff, and the general public, today's meeting is being held electronically. This electronic meeting is required to complete essential business on behalf of the region. Per the requirements of the Code of Virginia, the agenda and all supporting documentation were posted on the LRTP website for public review, and electronic copies of this information were provided to the LRTP subcommittee members and other interested parties. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The live stream is available for viewing on the Regional Connection YouTube channel, and the recording will be made available via the LRTP website. The general public was provided an opportunity to comment on today's agenda in advance of the meeting via two options. Members of the public were invited to email comments to the LRTP subcommittee. Members of the public were also invited to call into a dedicated phone line where comments could be recorded for LRTP subcommittee members. No comments were received via either option as of 48 hours before this meeting. Before we begin today's remote meeting, I would like to remind members of a few important housekeeping rules. Everyone is asked to keep their phones and computers muted except for when you are providing input. Please identify yourself by name and locality or agency. The agency you represent when you provide input. Please do the same should you provide a motion or a second. All votes taken today must be made by roll call vote and recorded in the minutes. Thank you, and attendance will now be recorded by roll call.
Good morning, everybody. We'll start with Troy Eisenberger, City of Chesapeake.
Present.
Carol Rizzio, Gloucester.
Present.
Mike Hayes, Hampton.
Present.
Actually, oh,
Lynn, are you here?
yes, Lynn Keenan is also here from Hampton.
Excellent.
Thank you. Jamie Oliver, Isle of Wight.
Present.
Paul Holt, James City County.
Here.
Thank you. Brian Stelly.
Here.
Debbie Mangiaracina, City of Norfolk.
Present.
Dana O'Connell, Pocosin. Carl Jackson, City of Portsmouth.
Present.
Thank you. Beth Lewis, Southampton County.
Present.
Thank you. Robert Lewis, City of Suffolk.
Robert won't be able to join us today. This is Jason Souders from Suffolk.
Thank you, Jason. Virginia Beach, Katie Shannon.
Present.
And Mark Shea.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Carolyn Murphy, City of Williamsburg. Tim Cross, York County.
Here.
Thank you, Tim. Ray Amaruso, HRT. Josh Moore, WADA.
Here.
Thank you. Grant Sparks, DRPT. Eric Stringfield with VDOT.
Present.
And Barb Nelson, Port of Virginia.
Present.
Thank you. Did I miss anybody going through this list? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We have,
Ivan Rucker, Federal Highway, I'm sorry.
oh, sorry, Ivan.
Thank you, Ivan.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Oh, we have,
I thought I saw Todd Hallisey on here too.
Hey Dale, this is Todd Hallisey. I'm here. VDOT.
Thanks, Todd.
all right, last call for participants. All right. Moving on to no submitted public comments on Does not appear we have anyone from the public to make comments at the meeting. Moving to item number 4, approval of the agenda. Dale, do you have modification to one item?
For the action item on number 6, based on the discussion during my presentation, there could be multiple recommended actions, but that's just based on discussion.
Okay, so I misunderstood you. So the agenda as presented in the handout. Does anyone have any modifications, corrections you'd like to make? All right, hearing none, I have a motion to approve the agenda.
This is Katie Shannon from Virginia Beach. Motion to approve.
Thank you, ma'am. I have a motion to have a second.
Second from Portsmouth, Carl Jackson.
Thank you, sir. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, moving forward with consent. Does anyone object to the motion? Hearing none, I'll declare the motion passes. Agenda item number 5, as noted in the agenda, due to the short turnaround from our last meeting, the minutes not currently available yet, will be submitted at a later date for approval. Item number 6, 2045 LRTP fiscal constraint in the roadway candidate projects. Ms. Stiff.
All right, can everybody see my full slides? All right, so as Brian stated, this is the second in our series of fiscal constraint meetings, virtual meetings, and today we are focusing on the remaining roadway candidate projects. So we're moving along, getting closer to that finish line. Today is probably going to be the most difficult, I think, of the 3 meetings, just because we have so many roadway candidate projects. As I just stated, this is our second meeting. Looking ahead, tomorrow we're going to do the fiscal constraint for transit and active transportation projects. We may need a 4th meeting after we get feedback tomorrow. Staff is going to look at just cleaning up the list. We might have to shift some projects for just to make sure we're making the right fiscal constraint assumptions. If we need a 4th meeting, we'll be sending out correspondence, and it may be something as simple as maybe logging into meeting about 30 minutes before the next TTAC if any additional recommended actions need to be taken. So summary from our meeting last Friday, which was our first meeting, which focused on the highway regional priority projects. Yesterday I sent out the summary of those recommended actions. Just looking at the list, there could be some refinement of this list. And what I mean by that is we might further subcategorize the highway regional priority projects. We're having some internal discussions, and it may be that we might highlight some of these, separate out which are HRTAC funded projects versus those that may be funded strictly with Smart Scale. Not sure that we're going to do that, but that's a potential refinement. We also want to make sure that we're reflecting ongoing regional studies in the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan that aren't captured by construction recommendations. So this would include the regional connector studies. Some additional studies that we may want to also include in the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan would be some sort of study or demarcation that acknowledgement that there are additional interchange phases of 64 to 64. So as money does become available for the region specific to interstate, that this could be an opportunity for the region to be very flexible to pursue additional funding. And there may be other projects as well. That is a suggestion. Another suggestion I heard for a potential study to include in the 2045 LRTP is possibly looking at a conversion of the HOV lanes on 264 to hot lanes. So that is something for this subcommittee to think about. We don't necessarily need to make the recommendation right now, but maybe in today's discussion, that might be something that could be suggested as part of our fiscal constraint. So for fiscal constraint, we've already, in Friday's meeting, talked about the maintenance that we have to take off right off the top from our transportation revenues, as well as the committed projects. As a part of this presentation, I'm not going to go into those assumptions just for the sake of time, but I do have reference slides at the end of this presentation that will be included as part of the slide deck when we post it to the website. Today, as part of our fiscal constraint with our remaining funding pots, we do need to account for that group project set aside that was approved as part of our fiscal constraint guidelines for the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan. We also need to talk about the distribution of funding in terms of highway versus transit and also roadway system. So I'll dive into that a little bit further in the following slides. So in terms of the 10% grouped project set aside, basically the funding pots that we apply this 10% set aside to include the district grant program, RSTP, CMAQ, and the other discretionary funding pot and transportation alternatives. So I have applied this 10% set aside, which gives us a remaining balance to fiscally constrain that you see on the right. And if anyone has any questions, please just stop me as I'm going here. One of the other fiscal constraint guidelines this subcommittee approved is a highway transit funding split. And initially, we used the historic CMAQ and RSTP funding to establish these funding splits. For CMAQ, it was recommended a 60-40 split, and for RSTP, a 70-30 for highway and transit. Now, one of the things that I noticed in doing internal funding scenarios, the way we've structured our candidate projects for the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan is that we are not evaluating intersection projects. We don't need to individually list intersection projects in a long range transportation plan. This is captured by our grouped project set aside. Therefore, looking at highway projects, because we don't have these intersection projects, we do not have any eligible highway CMAQ projects. Therefore, one of the modifications I'm proposing to our fiscal constraint guidelines is instead of doing a RSTP and CMAQ highway transit funding split, instead use the RSTP revenue estimates on highway and then use the CMAQ revenue estimates on transit. And there's also opportunity for active transportation being constrained with CMAQ, which we can discuss that transit active transportation split more at tomorrow's meeting. But if you look at the two total columns, it's very similar. If we do it this way, in terms of a highway transit funding split, and in the 2040, when we had these highway transit RSTP CMAQ funding splits, a lot of that RSTP balance actually came back to the highway anyway, because there weren't enough transit projects that we could fiscally constrain for construction. So that is one of the modifications that we are suggesting, and we have factored into our fiscal constraint spreadsheet that we're going to be doing in a little bit. I can pause here if there's any discussion to see if the group agrees with this or has any concerns with this proposed modification.
Any questions, concerns from the floor?
And this is curious, what would a CMAQ highway project look like? Just, it seems like the flavor of CMAQ projects and, you know, functionality of a highway don't overlap. I was just curious what a what a CMAQ highway project would look like.
In the LRTP world, it was intersection projects before. And then, you know, we just decided, because we had so many projects, that because we don't need to evaluate intersection projects in the LRTP, just to save staff time, we're letting those intersection projects be captured under that group set aside. So that's why there are no other highway eligible CMAQ projects in the LRTP.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Troy, this is Katie from Virginia Beach. To give an example, and I think it's like Dale said, it's the exception, not the norm, but we just did a super street on Holland Road as one of our new CMAQ projects that has tentatively been scheduled for funding in FY27. So that could be, it's a lower cost, but it's not an actual intersection. It's a section of roadway. But again, it's, the exception, not the norm.
And something like that too, that's not something that, we need to individually list. That's a type of project that's captured under our group set aside. So if I'm not hearing any objections, I'm going to take it as this is an accepted proposed modification.
Please continue.
The other thing, when doing our internal funding scenarios, we noticed that if we're just going straight down the list with prioritization scores, we're not funding secondary projects and not a lot of urban projects. For our previous long-range transportation plans, we've always implemented a roadway system split. Essentially, it was 40% for interstate, 30% for primary, 5% for secondary, and 25% for urban. And I know the way smart scale funding occurs, they no longer do these roadway system funding splits. But I think for our purposes, and because we're planning 20 to 25 years out, I do think it's important for our region that we want to make sure that we're representing all areas of our region. So we want to make sure that our counties are well represented. So I do think still using some form of this roadway system split is good for our planning purposes. And internally, we came up with what this would look like in terms of still sticking with a 40, 30, 5, 25 roadway system split. Looking at the funding pots that this would apply to, which would include the smart scale funding pots of high priority, district grant, RSTP, CMAQ, the discretionary and transportation alternatives. If we do that and apply these percentages, we come up with, see this amount in this third column here. Now, with what we did on Friday, a lot of the interstate has already been expended and a little bit of the primary on the highway regional priority projects. So the very last column is the balance today that we have to fiscally constrain the remaining roadway projects using this roadway funding split. And I will pause here to see if there's any agreement or concern with applying a roadway funding split.
It does, Brian. It seems to make sense to me to proceed the way you've shown.
I agree. I like that it does make sure that our counties have as much opportunity to be fiscally constrained into the long-range transportation plan as these higher scoring interstate projects.
Any more comments from the floor? Hearing none, let's proceed.
Another thing we factored in what we've highlighted in the spreadsheet that you'll see shortly are the Smart Scale Round 4 recommendations and active RSTP and CMAQ projects. So when Keith pulls up the spreadsheet later, we've highlighted, I guess it's 3 projects since Denby is already part of the recommendation we had on Friday. You'll see a couple of projects highlighted in purple. That will be Smart Scale Round 4 recommendations. I do think it's important that we go ahead and include these because it's very likely these projects are going to get the smart scale funding. And if we don't include them now, we will just have to amend the plan in very early as soon as we adopt the 2045 long range transportation plan. The RSTP and CMAQ active transportation projects, these are projects that have been receiving money, a lot of them for years now. Some of them are newer. but it's something to factor into the discussion later on today, that if these projects are on our books in terms of RSTP and CMAQ, that if there is an opportunity to constrain them, that should be also part of today's discussion. And you'll see these active RSTP projects highlighted in a, what would that be, like a teal, a cyan. And then I'd also like to acknowledge again the public comments we received from the Southern Environmental Law Center. Again, these public comments are documented in our project prioritization scores report, but as part of SELC's public comments, they did note 4 projects that you're going to see on the candidate project list today, or 4 groups, I should say. It's the Greenbelt phases 1 and 2, Nemo Parkway phase 7B, and US Route 460 relocated, and the US 460 5813 connector. And just to summarize their comments in terms of these particular projects, SELC expressed strong concern regarding potential environmental, wildlife, and flooding impacts to protected and or sensitive areas. Again, these comments are documented in the report if you'd like to look at them a little closer. I will note that we did receive a response from the City of Virginia Beach. We forwarded those responses to Southern Environmental Law Center. Virginia Beach also, their comments are also documented into our prioritization reports. And just, you know, real quick, and Katie, you can add if I don't summarize this correctly, but in Virginia Beach's response for the Greenbelt phases, these are now smaller sections of the original Southeastern Parkway and Greenbelt project. It's more of an arterial instead of a expressway, and the city is looking at a multimodal approach within right-of-way, and they acknowledge that if there's any revisions that need to be made to the project or the right-of-way, that this would be reevaluated through the NEPA process. And in terms of Nemo Parkway, the city says that this is a critical hurricane evacuation route and provides more safe and resilient alternative to the Sandbridge community, and the project also includes stormwater design. So Katie, I don't know if you need to add anything. Okay.
That's perfect, thank you. And I will also add NIMO 7B is already an active project with significant amount of RSTP funding on it.
Thank you. And then I also saw some internal emails from Eric to other departments in VDOT. And you know, Eric is seeing if he can obtain additional feedback that we can provide to Southern Environmental Law Center, and also acknowledge that the comments will be considered for projects currently in planning or in the development stage. And Eric, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add further from VDOT's perspective.
No, Dale, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so in terms of our recommended action in your agenda, it's hopefully the discussion today arrives at a recommendation to TTAC for these remaining roadway projects. Also, as part of the recommended action, we need to account for the modifications in the fiscal constraint guidelines. So when we get to that point, we'll just make note that we are making some adjustments to that highway transit funding split in terms of the funding sources for RSTP versus CMAQ, and also applying that roadway funding split by interstate, primary, secondary, and urban. So before we jump into the spreadsheet, were there any other questions? So we'll get started with the fun. And again, when we post this presentation, we do have these background fiscal constraint slides that I'm not going to go over now, but they will be available as part of our slide deck. Okay, so can everyone see this spreadsheet?
Yes.
So today we're basically with the discussion we had as far as using RSTP, the full RSTP and not CMAQ, and then using the roadway funding splits. We've organized the funding pots that you see on the top It's going to be by district grant for interstate. And then we have primary, secondary, and urban columns. That's going to be a mixture of district grant and RSTP, which just to not have 20 columns on here, we're just going to put primary, secondary, and urban, and internally we'll make those adjustments between district grant and RSTP for our final fiscal constraint spreadsheet. We did have a small other discretionary pot. We had about 30 million, but this pot was used to help constrain the VA 164 project that was included in the recommendations on Friday. So we won't really need to mess with the other discretionary funding pot, but I just want to show it just so if you look at the total, you understand where that 73 million is coming from. So I think that the easiest way to start is to look at the interstate projects and fiscally constrain candidate projects based on the interstate balance, which after we've done our funding split, we have just under 200 million for interstate candidate projects. And if we go by prioritization score and start looking at cost estimates, we can just start looking at what projects are eligible for that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Michael King from the Navy.
Sure.
Yes, just want to address the committee. The Navy's really pushing hard for our air terminal interchange. This is a project, it's under interstate, but it's an interchange. Supports transportation from NSA Hampton Roads, the base, to Norfolk Naval Station. Also takes some trucks off of Hampton Boulevard and facilitates traffic in and around that area of the port, the combination of the confluence of the port, the Navy base, NSA Hampton Roads, and all the traffic of Hampton Boulevard. We believe the Navy, the interchange project, ATI, scored very well, 177. Also want to add to the fact that it's currently under design by VDOT, committed to $11 million. They're currently designing the project, which is critically important. Lastly, I'll say that the ATI we're still pursuing the route with VDOT. VDOT was committed to fully funding and constructing it as a trade-off for the right-of-way we gave VDOT for I-564. That's not necessarily discussion for this group. However, I just want to make that point in fact. So with the remaining balance, you've got just under 200 million. And the 186 estimate that I'm reading here is, the projects are always more expensive, but it's a little high. VDOT has estimated recently, as of last fall, that the project was going to be about 110 million. So it's coming in less than that. So I'm just proposing that that we use some of the remaining balance of the highway funding to support the construction and get it fiscally constrained, the ATI project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, sir. Dale, just for clarification, the projects that you had mentioned before that have the smart scale and RSTP expectations for what we've seen from the scoring, are those already blocked out in this spreadsheet, or they need to be modified?
We have not deducted the funding assumptions for the smart scale round port recommendations on the active RSTP projects, except for Denby, the I-64 Denby interchange. We've already accounted for from Friday's meeting.
Okay, so for the district grant interstate, the number that we're seeing there at 199 wouldn't be subject to adjustment if we put in the smart scale and RSTP projects.
The interstate pot that we're looking at with the 199, no, there's no further adjustment that needs to account for the smart scale recommendations for active RSTP projects.
Oh, thank you.
And Keith, can you go ahead and filter by interstate so we can just be looking at the interstate projects? Thank you. So yeah, Michael King's right that the first one, if we're going down by scores, that we can constrain is ATI.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. That's and noticeably important. The other projects that are scoring higher, there just isn't enough funding left over. And with this funding, it's more than enough to adequately address the budget necessary to construct ATI. And we feel that we're in strong standing here with the scoring and the design underway. And it's a logical next step for the committee. Thank you.
All right.
Does anybody have any objections if we go ahead and mark this as constraint with the interstate district grant pot?
Mr. Chair, this is Katie Shannon with Virginia Beach. I agree with that. It's the highest scoring project that we can fiscally constrain. So, and obviously it's high priority for the Navy. It makes sense to me.
I concur.
Thank you, Katie. Others appreciate the support.
All right, looking at there's the balance at that point, you've got 12 million. I-64 at Settlers Landing Road modification, is that a project outside of the HRBT and express lanes activity? Is that some other component?
I don't know if the city of Hampton and or VDOT can speak to that. I'm not quite sure exactly what the project and if the work that's currently going on at HRBT already covers that project.
Yes, this is Lynn from Hampton. This is just modifications of the ramp, and I am not sure, having not seen, I don't know if this, it's a pretty high level plan that we had put in previously in the 2040. And so it's basically ramp modifications. So I'm not sure if VDOT can speak to more if there would be leftover, though I'm sure that there's some improvements as far as flow and capacity that could be addressed.
Mr. Chair, this is Eric from VDOT. I know some of these interchange improvements may or may not be included with the current project that's underway. I just don't have enough information to tell you exactly what additional work would be done around interchanges. But if the cost is low enough and it'll fit, I would recommend adding it. Would there be a problem if we find out that it's already being covered by HRBT? Would it be a problem to take it out?
From our perspective, no, because it's really, I don't know that we have enough to fiscally constrain any other projects with this funding source, and we do have some of those studies that we may want to constrain with the balance. But a question, Eric, if it's ramp modifications, could that be something that is covered under our group set aside, since it's not really any new movements to the interchange?
I would certainly concur with that.
So if that's the case, maybe we just want to look to see if there is maybe another project that is around 10 million that might not fall under a grouped project. If we can just
scroll down.
Keith, if you don't mind scrolling down with the interstate and just see if there are any other interstate candidates that. There is the 264 at Ballantyne. I don't know if Norfolk staff or VDOT can speak to what that project might be.
Hey, Dale, can I check to see if Ray Hunt's on the line? He had been working with some of the preliminary work on the Ballantyne project. Ray, are you there today? I guess he couldn't join us, but
how about what does the subcommittee think about this? If for now we should put a placeholder on Valentine, we'll behind the scenes confirm that settlers, either the work's being captured now by the work of HRBT, or that it could be captured in our grouped project set aside. If the answer is no to those questions, then we would fund that or constrain that Settlers Landing because it's a higher scoring project. Otherwise, we would look at this 264 Valentine and the same things, just look to see, is this something that could be captured by our group set aside, or is it something that we need to line item list?
This is Brian. I don't have any objection to that. I have other comments from the floor.
So Keith, go ahead and put a yes by the 264 Valentine. Thank you. Okay, so now, Keith, I forget which one's better to do next, the primary or urban or?
I think the next one we have to do is the smart scale projects that are they're shown in purple that we talked about earlier.
Thanks for keeping me straight. Right, so Holland Road is one of the smart scale round 4 recommendations. I think that could be urban. And if there are any objections, are there any objections for us including these smart scale recommendations? Since if we don't, we'll just have to amend the plan later when we get the funding.
Okay. I was curious why the math came out at 22. I don't have any objections. Do we have any from the floor?
Mr. Chair, this is Eric from VDOT. I don't have any objections either, including the smart scale amounts, but I just want to advise the group that these numbers, or this is the staff's draft working scenario. So it does have the potential to be changed. We hope not, but just wanted you guys to be aware of that.
Thank you, Eric. I think it's one of those situations where we include them now and have a minor modification or two for if something falls off, or we don't include them and then have to shoehorn in the successful applicants at the end. So we're hoping that the district staff's recommendations are carried forth and we don't need a corrective action later.
And Keith, when we added these columns this morning, I didn't check the right referencing, so I see that you're capturing. Sorry.
Yes, it's going to take me a second to update the formulas once we get the smart scale projects in there.
Okay, I'll buy you a lunch for that. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, this is Katie from Virginia Beach Gang. Can I just ask, so for projects that qualify for the multiple pots of money, are we just going with, how are we, I guess, determining that?
So I can speak to that. With, you know, with fiscal constraint, by no means the pot that we're using to fiscally constrain means that's the pot of money this project will get moving forward, or even if the project will ever successfully get money for construction. We're just demonstrating that there is reasonably available funds. So if a project is eligible for multiple pots, we just try to use the most limiting pot first for that project, if that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you. And I just saw the project system column as well. Sorry about that.
So next, that's one. Let's see. Oyster Point. I thought there was one more.
I thought the third one was Denby, and it was already
included.
I thought it was a SIPSA flyover. Did I not highlight that one? Or maybe I did go to
SIPSA was RSTP.
That's right. I'm sorry, confusing all these different funding sources. Okay, so now, would the committee like to look at the active RSTP projects before we start at the top with the scores, or what's the committee's desire?
That makes sense to me. Any other comments from the floor?
I agree.
So first one would be George Washington, US 17 in Chesapeake. And that's the Gloucester, US 17. Alaskan Phase 3. And then, so for the SIPSA flyover, Eric or Todd, can you speak to that? I know that a portion of this corridor is receiving funding, the SIPSA flyover, but I don't know that we need to constrain the entire corridor at 180 million.
Dale, that's correct. I'll start off, and Todd, you jump in when you want to. Really the interchange, we're looking at $45-50 million range for the cost for the SIPSA interchange. We have a refined estimate for 39, but I was just giving a little cushion for it. Now for the Chesapeake piece, Troy does have some safety improvements that they identified, but the corridor study also included an additional interchange for the airport. So we do need to try to figure out how we can split this up.
For the purposes of, well, so for safety, for Chesapeake's purposes, any safety improvements can fall under our group set aside. For the SIPSA flyover, we can break that out. For simplicity right here, we would just keep it as one line item for our spreadsheet, but we can actually break apart like sort of a parent and child project and only fiscally constrain the SIPSA flyover for the purposes of the 2045 LRTP.
That sounds perfect to me.
Now, if we reduce that cost then to, you said 45 to 50 million, and that includes cushion?
Yeah, well, because we know that we're looking at two phases, a phase one and an ultimate bill for the SIPSA interchange. And right now we have a preliminary estimate for the phase one portion. I think it's 39 million. But if we have to go to the ultimate bill to satisfy some of the environmental requirements, we'd be looking to increase that number to 45 or 50. I just don't have a definite number for the ultimate bill yet.
And then I've also heard that SIPSA is putting up money towards this project.
I believe that's correct. I think they had set aside $5 million to support their effort in the bill grant process. So I'm assuming that $5 million is still available, but we don't have anyone from SIPSA here with us today to confirm that $5 million is still on the table.
How about we put 50 million as the estimate and a $5 million local contribution, which Keith, you can just mark under the other discretionary for now, just to keep things, just so I remember to do that. And then that way it still represents your 45 to 50 million dollar range, and then a potential $5 million contribution from SIPSA.
Okay.
Any objections from the committee if we constrained a portion of this candidate project, specifically the SIPSA flyover?
That's Brian. I don't have an objection, but if we're just looking at the flyovers as standalone, do we need to retitle the project name to the flyover? Just to make sure that it's just that one section that we've already discussed.
Yeah, and Keith, you can go ahead and just put SIPSA flyover there and just highlight this row in red, and I'll remember to update.
Chair, this is Pavitra. CIPSA was at TPS 2 weeks ago, and they talked about a $5 million set aside in their presentation. But no one from CIPSA is on the meeting, but they were at the Transportation Programming Subcommittee on the 15th, and they said they'd set aside $5 million if that helps any.
Okay, great. So it is a $5 million. They said $5 million commitment at the TPS meeting.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the presentation, and their presentation said CIPSA has set aside $5 million towards the project. Their cost estimates went up, but at that time they said $5 million at the 15th meeting. So,
thank you. So Keith, I think you put 45 million there, right? And then change the updated cost to complete to 50. Did that subtract, Keith, from the balance? You might have to put a yes instead of an asterisk. Or maybe not. I don't know. It might work.
Hey, Dale, as far as description, can you just put CIPSA flyover in parentheses with the 460-5813 connector?
All right, Brian, not having the connector is something that we've put the RSTP on. We just put money on the flyover. If it's a separate project, they'll need to come through for the full process.
Hey, Mr. Chair, could you restate that, kind of clarify it for give me a little bit of clarity on it?
The project that was requested at the TPS meeting was just a flyover, at a cost of the original 20 something that grew into the 50 million. So to have an item that we're putting into the LRTP is a confirmed project. The confirmed project so far from what we've seen at the subcommittee level is a flyover itself. The full connector would be some companion project or other component in the area, but it's not in this. If we're looking at the RSTP confirmed for the future projects, it wouldn't fit in the same box.
And Eric, we would still show the corridor project on our vision list if it doesn't make fiscal constraint today. We're just constraining that CIPSA flyover piece of it.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. So we got the total in as 50, 5 million committed. Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we have any more RSTP projects. We have the NEMO Phase 7B. All right, so now we can start back at the top and just pick a funding pot, primary, if there's no objections, and start constraining the balance of the primary. So Keith, go ahead and hide the interstate projects.
Yeah, do you want me to bring up just primary at the moment, since we're looking at primary funds first?
Does anybody have any objections if we just start looking at primary eligible in the primary pot?
That makes sense to me.
No objection.
Do you want us to start putting yeses until we fiscally constrain the projects going by the scores?
Mr. Chair, this is Katie from Virginia Beach. I like that process going through the scores. That's typically how we award or allocate any funding.
Yeah, I'm going on the assumption that we don't have any contingent projects, you know, to look out for phase-wise, anything like that.
I don't know if there are any localities, if they need to speak of if there's a project that it's critical for, you know, for other reasons that we constrain and not just going down by score. But speak up now and forever hold your peace.
Well, hi, Dale. This is Carl in Portsmouth. One thing I just wanted to mention, if the committee could also consider these primary projects that serve defense facilities. We have a project on Elm Avenue in Portsmouth that would serve 2 gates to the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. And it's a very critical project, you know, for the military, for the Navy, and for the city. Just something to consider. I'm sure there are other projects out there as well that serve, you know, defense facilities and are very critical to the region.
All right, thank you. Carl, any others? I believe we can proceed with coming down the list until we run out of funding.
Sorry, Brian, I was unmuting. I was actually trying to look at another spreadsheet. This is Troy from Chesapeake. One that we would like to maybe jump up the line if we could is, and it does definitely go a little bit further down, is phase 1 of Centerville widening, which includes the bridge replacement from, I believe that piece is the, I'm trying to look at which number it is. So it's definitely down the list for in the LRTP scoring. It came up with I think it got the highest or one of the highest scores with utility. It just sinks because it's an expensive project that, you know, hasn't got any money put on it yet, hasn't really started any of those pieces. But that's one that we would probably, I mean, we'd want that one to jump all the military phases.
Is it listed in a primary or is it in another category?
It might be urban, so maybe just everything I said.
Yeah, I think it's urban because I can't find it under the primary.
Okay.
So
So
do you have that project ID handy, the 2045 project ID handy? If not, we can look it up.
I'm hanging it.
That's right. If it's urban, we can just make sure that we see where that lies as we do the urban constraint. As long as we're not skipping over here with this primary part. Should we just go ahead and continue with the primary?
Yeah, I think you're gonna have to start getting choosy.
And I'll keep looking. When I open more than 2 windows on this laptop, it grinds to a halt. So I am trying to. The only thing I miss is about going in is my desktop computer, but we're tugging along.
Hey, Dale, it's Teresa. The project ID for Centerville Road Phase 1 is 2045-127.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks,
Yep.
Teresa.
Keith, before you expend all of that, if we put in the Elm project, like Carl had mentioned, so would that one of the Alaskan projects wouldn't be able to be constrained? What the city of Virginia Beach, what's the stance on the 2 Alaskan Road projects, phase 1B and phase 2?
All of our Alaskan projects are on corridors of statewide significance and also serve the military bases in the area. So they are, you know, critical for us as well. Are we able to use any of the discretionary money to make up that $9 million?
We could use urban, right, Keith? I mean, because they're in the city.
I was just going to say that, Dale. Yeah, for any of these primary roadways like Alaskan Road that are in the cities, we can also use urban funds. So just looking through this, odds are it would probably be eligible for urban funding anyway. So.
Katie, for some of the
Same with Elm Avenue too, by the way. That would apply for Portsmouth's Elm Avenue project.
Katie, for some of the small shortfalls, does the city have the capacity to locally fund the Delta?
We do. We will be submitting, what we're going to fund with our local funding to Dale. I was just waiting kind of for this meeting. We could potentially do that as well. I'd rather get the project in and fund the difference as opposed to not have it in at all.
Understood.
And Mr. Chair, this is Carl in Portsmouth. I would say that of the primary projects, Elm Avenue is probably the most cost effective. It's the lowest costing project. So if we could, keep that as funded through primary, that would be great.
Yeah, that's Carl. One of the things I was looking at is if you have the small Delta at 9. If say Laskin Road Phase 2 could be coupled between either primary and urban or primary and local funds, we could bridge that gap.
Okay.
Hey Dale, it's Teresa. I'm looking at the military highway projects, row 29 and row 31. Is there overlap with their termini?
There is, and that's what I'm trying to figure out right now, which is the way to capture the whole thing. They're definitely overlap, so that's a place we can clip. I'm trying to figure out where that's at right now.
Yeah, it looks like the one in row 31 encompasses the whole corridor, where 29 is just a subset of it. So really, this project really wouldn't need to be funded, since the one below it would be.
We have the umbrella one. So making sure there's no little piece that was missing, but yeah, those two smaller ones could come out.
Fantastic.
And Keith, can you strike through the child projects or that child military, just so? And you said projects, Troy. Is there another one?
Yeah, there's two. The campus up 2 rows, the campus style battlefield would be included in that as well. I think this is a case where we had two. Marlin, I think that was either publicly submitted or it came from another source. So apologize for any extra confusion on that. I think it's just the two projects, the umbrella project came from 2 different directions. So as long as we have the corridor covered, we're fine.
Perfect. Thanks for pointing that out, Teresa.
And this is Sam with TPO staff. Also noticed there was a similar case with the Centerville Turnpike project, where there's 2 overlapping projects. One of them goes from Mount Pleasant to Elbow, and then the other one goes from Mount Pleasant to Virginia Beach. So it just depends on how far you want to go.
Yeah, when we switch, I think I know which piece we went on that. So
yeah,
Sam, we can get to that when we talk about it.
Thanks, everyone.
Keith, my math is failing me. We've pulled out $85 million between the 2 military highway projects. Well,
yeah, you're right. And so that basically goes to Independence Boulevard, which was originally too costly for primary, but now it can be funded. And then the other projects remain the same, with the 6.8 million of urban funds necessary.
My brain can read. I got you now. All right. With this modification, anybody have further discussion on the primary subset?
This is Jamie with Isle of Wight. I just had a question for Dale real quick, because it's come up a couple of times. Do we have any criteria in the tool that we look at impacts to the military or military utilization? I thought we accounted for that somehow in the scoring.
Yes, there's a score about increased accessibility for the military and military defense supporting facilities. Is the road part a straw net, or is it a roadway serving the military? So there's a couple of factors in our scoring.
Yeah, this is Sam. I just wanted to reinforce that built into the utility as part of that, like Dale said, if that corridor includes if it's a roadway that's part of the straw net or a part of the roadways that serve the military or important installations in the region, then it receives additional points. So it is built into it.
Thanks for the clarification. All right, so we're ready to move to secondary streets. All right.
All right, just start putting yeses from the top.
Yep, you get 3 of them in.
Of the 2 that are remaining, sorry, it fails me what locality these projects are in.
In James City.
This is Paul. I'm fine with not including Long Hill Road Phase 3. Phase 2 is going to be our next more important one. So, we'll just come back to Phase 3 in 5 more years with you, Dale.
Sounds good. And then Jamie, do you have any comments on the battery park project?
I don't at this time. We've got a lot of development on the table under consideration right there, and that corridor is just a bit in flux right now. So it might be something that comes back in a couple of years if it doesn't make it now.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so on to urban. And we can use that 2.6 if we need to. We can shift it to urban, 2.6 million. So filter by urban.
It's filtered along with the primaries. That would be, we'll have to look through and see which ones are eligible to be used in the cities. But I just didn't know if you wanted to talk about this Hampton Terminal project first before we start filling it in.
Do we want to start doing the yeses? I don't know if like Barb, if you want to say anything about the project from the port's perspective. It is a high scoring, I think the highest scoring non-interstate roadway project that we have.
Sure. So the grade separation at Hampton Boulevard and Terminal Avenue has been a high priority of not only the Port of Virginia, but also I think the Norfolk community. And as the investments that have been made by the Commonwealth, $350 million to optimize the Norfolk International Terminals, the south portion of the terminal, which is fed at Terminal Avenue and on Hampton Boulevard. We have nearly significantly impacted the capacity of that terminal, and we expect the future of that growth to be moved significantly by rail. And so in an effort to minimize and mitigate impacts on the regional transportation network and on the community outside of our gate, this is a high priority for the Port of Virginia.
Thank you, Barb. So do we want to start putting the yeses and see where we get with the urban funds?
Yes.
And then so like this next project, we're just like skipping over the primary and doing urban. Is that how we want to do that? Or Keith, did you say some of these primary systems are still eligible for urban as well?
They are. I'm just skipping over the ones that have already been funded at this point. Okay. But if it's on the list and it's primary or urban and not funded, I would put a yes next to it. And actually, there's only 32 million left when I get to here, so there's not much more that's going to fit anyway.
So reaction to what the yeses now with the urban, if you can scroll back up, Keith, so they can see what's being suggested to constrain going just off the scores.
For the Crane Island Access Road, that be, I see Crane Island Marine Terminal with interchange. Is that something that would support the current activities there, or is that all geared towards the future development?
So that actually shouldn't say with interchange. That should be this Craney Island access road, and Barbie can speak more to this, is a two-lane facility that would access the future Craney Island terminal. It's not part of the Patriots Crossing or Craney Island connector with the Craney Patriots Crossing. This is a separate two-lane road facility.
Right. What I'm asking is it something that's designed to serve the Navy's fuel depot and the Portsmouth landfill and the existing core function, or is it solely a direction for the future for that terminal access?
Mr. Chair, this is Carl in Portsmouth. Yeah, we sit on the same RCS committee. I don't think that we've quite determined, a proper alignment, that wouldn't conflict with the needs of the military or with, the city's needs at the landfill there. So I just have a few reservations about that project.
This is Barb Nelson with the port. I can comment on that project. We are working as part of the regional connector study, although we're not a voting member of that particular working group or steering committee. However, our primary interest is to provide or to ensure regional access to the future Craney Island Marine Terminal through an interconnected road system that would be advanced as an element of the regional connector study. However, when the decision was made by the TPO at the recommendation of the working group to decouple the regional connector study from the long-range transportation plan, the port needed to ensure that access to the future Craney Island would not be held up by the decoupling action of the regional connector study. So this project was submitted so that we could preserve the economic opportunity of the port and the Commonwealth in ensuring that approximately 5 million containers, which is the future growth of Craney Island Marine Terminal, that it would have access to the regional transportation network. And so we would recommend that it continue to stay in and move forward.
Mr. Chairman, this is Michael King from the Navy. I just want to concur with Mr. Jackson's sentiment. There's major issues associated with any activity on Craney Island that's related to Navy property. We have stated so in the regional connector study and have mentioned that any activity could potentially harm some of our own expansion plans of the fuel depot, and that case has not been settled yet. So I just want to cement Mr. Jackson's comments that any road or intrusion into Craney Island and likely the Corps of Engineers property as well, but I won't speak for them. The Navy is highly concerned, and at the moment, we haven't found a way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Barb, for the proposed marine terminal, do you have a expected opening date for that facility?
We are targeting it takes 10 years to bring the terminal, at least 10 years to bring the terminal up out of the water. And so we are looking at the earliest horizon for phase one would be in the 2035 timeframe, 2035 to 2040 timeframe. And because with the and I'll just pause there. And I guess I will to Michael's comment and both Carl's comment, as we have stated as part of the regional connector study, the port is committed to working with our partners to address the offset concerns of the Navy as well as the city of Portsmouth with the landfill. And we believe that we can work in partnership to address their issues.
This is George Chesapeake. Yeah, I have just I guess to Carl's comment, you know, when we did the screening, we did the physical constraint for the interchanges, bridges and tunnels. The project that crossed Craney Island were removed for a similar reason, that they were following RCS, and I understand the sensitivity that Barb has. This is broken out to kind of avoid that. But I know when we did the interchange, we did the physical constraint of the interchange, we took those projects out for a similar reason. So.
Thank you, Troy. Any comments from the floor?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all the comments that have been made. I also understand where Barb is coming from, but you know, again, you know, the cost of this project is so high, and with so much uncertainty, you know, as far as you know, whether or not you know a project like this would be able to satisfy the needs of the Navy, you know, and the city and the Corps and so many stakeholders. You know, I would just recommend, you know, if possible, maybe, you know, we can just, you know, continue the RCS before we commit any funding to this project.
Yeah, to Carl's point, the high cost and high risk for this project, to retain it within the long range transportation plan would mean the omission of multiple other projects.
So this is Barb Nelson, and just to have to add one additional comment. As was discussed in a regional connectors working group meeting back in October, the Craney Island Marine Terminal is not a vision project. It is a project that has received federal authorizations and federal funds, and has continued and has recently received additional funds through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers work program, the FY21 work program. And so it is the Craney Island Marine Terminal is a project that is coming to the future, in the future, to the Hampton Roads region. And access to Craney Island is something that we have proposed an alternative with the Craney Island access in lieu of a solution coming through the regional connectors study. And it is a critical freight project for the port, we believe, for the region and for the Commonwealth, and we request that it remain in.
Dale, from curiosity, is there a reason that it's classified in the urban section and not in primary or district grant? You know, I think of the urban category more as, you know, arterials and collectors.
No, for these intermodal projects, I think when Keith and I were assigning the project assignment, we were assigning urban to the intermodal projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Michael King from the Navy. I sympathize with Barbara and the port submission here. However, I just want to go on the record from the Navy standpoint. We haven't agreed to any cut through of our fuel depot property on Craney Island. So whatever the committee decides, if this project is included, we want it understood in the minutes to reflect that the Navy has not agreed to anybody cutting through our property. And we want to make sure that that's noted. So as this project continues on its way through the transportation bureaucracy, we want it known that we haven't agreed to any cut through. So just making that clear. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the opportunity.
Sir.
Mr. Chair, this is Eric from VDOT. 164 is kind of labeled as a freeway types of facilities, and then the urban group might be best. But I do concur with the points provided both from the Navy in Portsmouth as well as the port. I know this is a difficult question to ask. The project is part of the regional crossing study. Is there a possibility to keep it included on the list as a PE only?
From the TPO perspective, that's fine. We can certainly include it as PE or as a study, so it's reflected in the fiscally constrained LRTP at a much lower cost.
Mr. Chair, this is, oh, sorry, Paul, you go.
Yeah, I wouldn't, this is Carl from Portsmouth, I wouldn't have a problem with that, to list it as study only.
This is Katie from Virginia Beach, and given the comments from Michael with the Navy, to me, it makes most sense to have that as a study and then be able to fiscally constrain some other projects.
Thank you. What's the valuation for the study of the preliminary engineering side?
It would be Eric or Barb. Come up with a number.
I was going to say, and the port would, for all of the reasons that we have all been discussing, not only on this morning's call, but as well as through the regional connector study, we would support at a minimum keeping this in as a PE only or study effort. If study, it would prefer that it be have sufficient funding so that it could advance further, and I believe it would give us an opportunity to definitively address many of the issues. Just as also as a point of clarification, the access road is a very different scale of a road compared to the facility that would be envisioned in the regional connector study, but we would support that. But what the cost estimate would be, I am a planner, not an engineer, and I apologize, I don't have that number. I'm looking to friends or colleagues on the call. Eric, would you have a suggestion for a value amount that we could use for that?
20% of the construction costs.
There we go.
And can we also look at, maybe allocating the next couple projects when we get to a point where we think we're close to 25 million, whether it's, even if it's 32, goes back to this project.
So,
Let's down and see what else, what's the work we come to.
But before we move off of the cost here, so Eric said 20% of construction. The 250 was construction and PE and everything. I would assume that would be lower than the 50 million.
Yeah, and we don't have, for these planning level cost estimates, we don't have them broken down by PE and construction. So maybe we just use that 50 million as the placeholder and we can refine it offline. I think we'd be close to that.
By the way, Mr. Chairman, the Navy supports keeping it in as a study or PE. We're okay with that.
Thanks, sir. All right, let's start with the 50 and see where we balance out, and then there's opportunity for adjustment before our next call tomorrow, right?
All right.
They're still smiling, so they're going faster.
So you're getting near the end. And then Troy, you'll have to let us know if we're getting close to your Centerville project.
I'm assuming that the two North Suffolk connectors are the same project?
Yes. What is the cost of the one project that Troy brought up?
We're like in the one, we're not going to make it to Centerville. It's, if we had the ability to do some sort of primary urban, if that was the case that was money flexible on our end, that kind of frees that up. But I think that phase one's at almost 197 because it has the bridge replacement section in it. So
I didn't realize the cost estimate was that high. I was kind of hoping it was in the 20 or 30 range. But
if we could get a bridge for that, we totally would be excited. But no, it's a little bit much on that.
And then, Keith, we can also add in that other 2 million if we need to, if there's a project that's just over the 9 that's in the urban.
Troy, would it be helpful to do like a study or PE only, similar to what we just did for the other project?
I'm going to feasibility. So we've got we're just for the bridge itself.
Keith.
And did you also, Troy, this is Sam, did you also talk about the potential of having it jump over military highway? I think you had that on the list. 'Cause I know that we've all, from experience recently, the Centerville Bridge, once it goes out, it pretty much like gridlocks Chesapeake. So we know that it's an urgent need today, and I just, if it's something that you could replace military highway, then that might be another option that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we would if I know, not understanding that with military being on the primary side and this being on the urban side, if we could that the battlefield widening, the military widening, we would put Centerville above that in terms of local needs. But I know there's different types of other things, and that project's further down the list. So we would support that if it's possible, but it seems that based on the discussion that it's something we can't do. Question mark, I guess.
Keith, I noticed when you were scrolling, we should also reflect that project in Franklin and Southampton, the US 58-258 intersection interchange improvements. There's a set aside as part of the agreement with the rural localities at 1.7. We should reflect that in one of these funding pots.
Is it all right if I take that 2.6 million from secondary and put toward it, Dale?
Yeah, we can change that later to make sure it's reflected properly. But yes, that's fine. This project was a set aside that we have on the books when the HRTF funding was started. That the rural localities, Franklin and Southampton, would have. I forget what the total amount is, but that there was money reserved for them to be able to spend on this interchange.
Well, it looks like we still have 9.3 million left in urban then, but we got to go pretty far way down to get to the next project.
I'll take it as a bonus.
Is it possible to take that urban money and put it towards an expanded grouped projects listing?
Yeah, we don't have to. We could also just leave it on the books, or maybe as we decide there could be another study or something we want to reflect, we can use.
Well, I think about the way that most of the localities and their applications are going towards, intersection improvements, things that are $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a piece, and making it where we need to start unplugging projects to have that capacity seems to be would be better.
Once we have that group set aside, it's a line item that we do not have to maintain or update. So as projects are applying for smart scale or other, mostly smart scale, the fact that we have a set aside is enough. We don't, it would be really impossible to try to maintain that with all the smaller projects that go on across the region.
Do we have any request recommendations for remaining 10.2 in funding? Keith, can you scroll down some to the projects we haven't hit yet?
There's a 6.8 project there.
Cedar Road. Locality.
That's us. That's
That'd be
Chesapeake.
Chesapeake.
Like to recommend it for inclusion, or you want us to keep going?
No, we would definitely. I didn't have the hopes that we make it down there. That's and that's one that we've studied. We have connecting pieces to that area. That runs right through an area that we've got some other intersection improvement. So it dovetails nicely with some other work we're doing there. So we would support that.
Any objections from the group? All right. We're at 2.5.
Mr. Chair, is there someone here from Suffolk? What was that 1 point for Suffolk? It was in blue.
I think that's the 258 in Franklin, Southampton.
Oh, all right. Okay, yes, you're correct.
Mr. Chair, this is Katie from Virginia Beach. Could we maybe table the issue for today and see, it sounds like we need to maybe refine that 50 million PE only as well, and that might free up some additional money to get, another project in there as well. I know we're meeting again tomorrow.
I'm very amenable to that. Any objections to tabling the remainder to see what the total could be tomorrow?
No, this is the Navy, Mr. Chairman. Also give the staff a good opportunity to sift through their spreadsheet, reorganize it for items we discussed here today, so it's a little clearer and we can do a little bit less paging up and down. I'm not opposed to that, obviously, but it'll give staff time to organize what we talked about today and make a clear picture when we meet tomorrow.
Thanks, sir. All right. Any last comments before we move on to the next piece? All right, Dale.
Right, so we need a recommended action from the group today, and this would include modifying our fiscal constraint guidelines in terms of the funding sources for the highway transit split, and also accounting for the roadway system split, and then the recommendation for fiscal constraint for the remaining roadway projects today.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a motion from the floor. Any discussion?
This is Katie Shannon from Virginia Beach. I'll put the motion out there of what Dale said. I don't have all the lingo, so which is probably why no one else is motioning.
Yeah. It's an action on the two funding strategies between transit and highway that we had presented earlier, and then the spreadsheet that we've worked through over the last little bit.
That sounds perfect.
Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
This is Troy from Chesapeake. I second.
Thanks, sir. The motion is second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, we'll proceed with a roll call vote.
Okay. Troy Eisenberger,
Yes.
Carol Rizzio,
Yes.
Mike Hayes,
Yes.
Jamie Oliver,
Yes.
Paul Holt, Paul? Brian Stilley?
Yes.
Debbie Mangiaracina?
Yes.
Carl Jackson?
Yes.
Beth Lewis?
Yes.
Jason Souders?
Yes.
Katie Shannon?
Yes.
Tim Cross?
Yes.
Josh Moore?
Yes.
Eric Stringfield?
Yes.
And Barb Nelson?
Yes.
Okay. Paul? Paul Holt? Okay, thank you.
Motion passes.
Dale, I assume you'll send that out for us as well. When do you think you need the local funding only projects? By the end of the week for the TTAC next week?
The end of this week would be fabulous, so that my plan is at TTAC, we would have all these recommendations together to start the public review. So that would need to include the local assumptions. And in any other locality on this call, if you have a project that's going to be funded with local funds that needs to be listed in the LRTP, I've sent out emails previously. I know I just heard from Chesapeake and Virginia Beach, but we need that information ASAP.
Right. Lost my agenda. Back up. Right. Any old new business for the group?
Mr. Chair, this is Eric. I'd like to ask Dale a question. I noticed in the list that you had incorporated the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Thimble Shows project. We've had some discussion on that second tunnel project, the Chesapeake tunnel. At what point would we be looking to have that added for the authority?
So I've had a conversation with the authority a few months back, and they're still working out the fiscal constraint for that second tunnel. And as soon as they work out the fiscal constraint, we'll amend the plan to include that project as well.
Okay, because we are working to try to get it added into the stip and tip as soon as we can. So I didn't know whether it would be good to try to slip it in so we wouldn't have to do an amendment later.
If we could demonstrate fiscal constraint before we start the 30-day public review and conformity, that would be fabulous.
Okay. All right.
All right. Any other old new business?
This is Mark Shea. Dale, I don't know if it's possible just to answer a real quick question about tomorrow's allocations. And I apologize if I missed discussion of it in our previous meeting, but with the active transportation, I guess in the past, like applications for transportation alternatives, they don't have to be on the regional plan, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and so most of the trails is not a real big deal if it doesn't get on the plan. Okay.
Correct, but we do think it's a great opportunity, one, to highlight that our plan's multimodal, when we can show these active transportation, especially the more regional active transportation projects. And I also think it's a great opportunity to pursue more funding for localities and agencies if they can show that they have a line item list in the long range transportation plan. So great question. And one of the things we're also going to talk about tomorrow is, we haven't done it previously, because we have these CMAQ, this CMAQ set aside, the group, we're going to ask the group to consider if there should also be some CMAQ assumptions towards these active transportation projects, in addition to the transit project.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Next call. Thank you all for your work today, and we'll reconvene tomorrow. Good evening.
Tomorrow, 1:30. Thanks, everyone.